Lizzie Borden was accused of murdering her stepmother and her father on August 4, 1892 in Fall River, Massachusetts. They were killed in the late morning when only Lizzie and the maid were home. Lizzie was acquitted and lived the rest of her life in solitude. But did she actually do it? This is a question that has been debated for over a century, so let's see if we can get to the bottom of it. Lizzie was 32 at the time of the murders. Her sister Emma was 10 years older. Both of them lived with their father, Andrew Borden, and stepmother, Abby Borden. Lizzie taught Sunday school and did volunteer work for charities. She also loved animals. Living with the family was Bridget, the Irish maid, but Lizzie and Emma called her Maggie. Some say they did this because their previous maid was named Maggie. One misconception is that they called her Maggie because that was a slang name given to all Irish maids, but actually Bridget was the name given to an unflattering caricature of an Irish maid, and the name caught on. So perhaps Lizzie and Emma called her Maggie because they didn't want to refer to her by a derogatory name. The house on 92 2nd Street in Fall River was a modest home relative to the houses on the hill where Lizzie and Emma really wanted to live. Their father was a wealthy man, but he was described as plain living and didn't want for anything more. He is often described as frugal. However, there is plenty of evidence to suggest that he is generous with his money. One common misconception is that the house they lived in had no plumbing, but that wasn't true. There was running water in the cellar in the washroom, running water from the sink in the kitchen, and running water in the barn. They also had a flush toilet in the cellar, but still used slop pails in the bedrooms. Andrew installed steam radiators to replace the fireplaces, and he remodeled the home to make it more livable. For example, the kitchen was originally upstairs, but he turned one of the rooms downstairs into the kitchen to make things easier for the women in his life. Andrew bought a summer home in Swansea, gave his daughters allowances so they didn't have to work, and he paid for them to have a constant supply of new handmade clothes. From time to time, he would give them bank stock, which they'd sell. He sent Emma to Wheaton College for a year and a half, where she had room and board and all expenses paid. And he sent Lizzie on a 19-week grand tour of Europe, all expenses paid. So while Andrew Borden did not want to live in a mansion on the hill and entertain the high society, his family were by no means living in poverty. In fact, Lizzie and Emma were well taken care of. But they wanted more. They wanted to be part of the hill crowd and experience arts and culture and high society events. They wanted to host lavish banquets and entertain rich friends. Their father could certainly afford for them to move there and have that lifestyle, but he did not see the point. He was a self-made man who started as an undertaker selling caskets. Then he moved into real estate. He was protective of his money, and he didn't want to spend it on anything he thought was unnecessary. Lizzie and Emma's real mother Sarah died when Lizzie was just 2 years old. 3 years later, her father married Abby. Lizzie called Abby mother up until 5 years before the murder, when, after a disagreement, she started calling her Mrs. Borden. Emma, on the other hand, had always called her stepmother Abby. It has been noted by several people who knew the Bordens that the family dynamic was a little strained. They got along but were not overly friendly with each other. We'll explore this and the possible motives later. But first, let's look at the timeline of events. Please note that there are conflicting statements from witnesses as to the times and sequences of events, so the timeline may not be 100% correct. The murders took place on Thursday the 4th of August 1892 while Emma was away in Fairhaven, having been gone for 2 weeks already. On Tuesday, 2 days before the murder, the family was sick, possibly from food poisoning. Bridget the maid had served fish that day, and Abby and Andrew were vomiting in the night. Lizzie did not vomit, and Bridget felt fine. The next morning, Abby goes to Dr. Bowen and tells him she is worried that she has been poisoned. She thought poison might be in their milk or some baker's bread that they had eaten. The doctor goes to the Borden house to check on everyone, but Lizzie heads upstairs and Andrew rebuffs his visit. Between 10 and 11:30 a.m., Eli Bentz, who worked at Smith's Pharmacy, claimed to have refused a sale of prussic acid to a lady who fit Lizzie's description. This item was cyanide, a deadly poison. The lady wanted it to put on the edge of a sealskin coat or cape. Both coat and cape are used different times when the man was questioned. In his inquest testimony, he said, She left the store in a very haughty manner. "No, I do not know her, but I think I would know her again, should I see her." And after being placed in a position where he could both see and hear Lizzie Borden, he was positive in identification, not only of her face and general appearance, but also of her voice. At P.S. Brown's pharmacy a day or two before, the worker there claimed to also refuse a sale of poison to a woman, but he could not describe her. Lizzie did own a sealskin coat or cape, but it was August and still very warm out. Why would she need to attend to a coat or cape at this time of year? According to her, she didn't. "Have you sealskin sacks?" "Yes, sir." "Where are they?" "Hanging in a large white bag in the attic, each one separate." "Put away for the summer?" "Yes, sir." "Do you ever use prussic acid on your sacks?" "Acid? No, sir, I don't use anything on them." So was this mystery woman even Lizzie? John F. McCaffrey was the state inspector of milk, adulterated food, etc. for the Massachusetts Department of Health. According to the Fall River Daily Evening News on the 15th of August 1892, McCaffrey had several female agents working in Fall River at the time of the murders. They were known as spotters. Christina Streckwald acted as one of McCaffrey's spotters. She would make purchases of food items, mostly of butterine, an early form of margarine, and face lotions. Streckwald would then hand them off to McCaffrey, who in turn would submit the items for analysis or examine them for packaging violations. Defenders of Lizzie argue that the woman who tried to buy prussic acid attributed their sighting to one of McCaffrey's spotters. The Fall River Daily Herald on the 6th of August 1892 said, "A clerk for Phileas Martle, a druggist on Pleasant Street, reported that last Monday he was approached in the store by a young lady who wanted to buy arsenic from him and was willing to give him any price for it. The clerk told her that the druggist was not present, he could not possibly comply with her wishes, whereupon she went out much disappointed. She returned 20 minutes later and asked for prussic acid. The article was again refused her, with the advice to return when the druggist would be back from dinner. Mr. Martle describes the caller of being about 26 years old, weighing about 150 pounds. This description seems to fit Lizzie, not Streckwald. The Fall River Globe on the 8th of August 1892 reported, "An attempt was made on Saturday night to float the theory that Eli Bence, the drug clerk, had mistaken Miss Lizzie Borden for Mrs. Streckwald, who purchases margarine and face lotion for State Inspector McCaffrey. This is absurd. Mr. Bence may be mistaken, of course, but State Inspector McCaffrey's partner looks about as much like Miss Borden as she does like John L. Sullivan." In the Fall River Daily Herald, dated the 2nd of January 1889, Christine Streckwald is described as a small, neat-looking lady of 45 years with small features, a sharp nose, hollow cheeks, and small, keen, dark eyes. She speaks in a clear, distinct, and decisive way and gives the impression that she knows what she is talking about and wants to impress her listeners that she is not to be trifled with. It seems clear, therefore, that Streckwald and Lizzie do not look or sound similar, so Bence is unlikely to have mistaken Lizzie for Christine Streckwald. Bence was also not the only person in the store that day. 2 other workers also identified Lizzie as the poison shopper. They both knew her by name and sight, and so were able to identify her when she was in the store. But even if this person was Lizzie, she may have wanted the acid for an innocent purpose. For example, prussic acid was used to relieve certain ailments. In the McIver Times, dated the 1st of February 1900, an article titled "The Uses of Prussic Acid" states, "It is used in many painful and distressing diseases of the stomach such as dyspepsia, cancer, ulceration, etc., for it not only relieves the pain but it also stops the vomiting and quiets the palpitation of the heart which so often accompanies these distressing affections." Lizzie's family had been vomiting that week, and her father had dismissed Dr. Bowen's visit shortly before Lizzie was seen trying to buy the prussic acid. Is it possible that Lizzie tried to buy some to cure their vomiting? Or had she tried to poison them in the previous few days and tried to buy prussic acid because whatever she used wasn't working? Continuing with the timeline, on the day before the murders, at noon, Lizzie, Abby, and Andrew had lunch in the dining room. At 1:30 p.m, John Morse arrives, and Bridget the maid lets him in. John Morse is Lizzie and Emma's maternal uncle. Their real mother, who has long passed away at this point, is his sister. John Morse had a farm in Iowa where he lived, but on occasion he would rent out his farm and travel east. At the time of the murders, he had been living for the past year in South Dartmouth, Massachusetts, with a family of butchers, the Davises. John had sold some horses and then started work in the meat business with them. John was in regular contact with Emma Borden, and occasionally he would get letters from Andrew Borden. John had visited the Bordens regularly while he was east, with his latest visit being July 10th. He claims to have not seen Lizzie on that visit or the previous visit in June. He did not see Lizzie on the visit of August 3rd, the day before the murder, either. John had arrived at the Borden house unannounced. They were not expecting him. He came not just to visit, but also because he and Andrew had written each other, talking about if John knew of a man who could take charge of a farm that Andrew had. John wrote to say that he had someone in mind, but about 10 days before the murders, Andrew wrote John again saying to wait until they saw each other to discuss it in person. When John arrived, he sat with Abby and Andrew and had lunch, even though they had already eaten. Then he and Andrew talked together in the sitting room. At 4 p.m, John leaves the Bordens' house to go to Swansea. He asked Andrew to go with him, but he did not feel well enough. He told John they had all been sick, including Lizzie. At 7 p.m, Lizzie goes to Alice Russell's house, who is a close friend of her and Emma. According to Lizzie, she was in her room all day not feeling well, and she thought getting some fresh air might help. While there, Lizzie tells Alice that she is afraid something bad will happen. She explains how her father and stepmother had been sick and they were afraid that they had been poisoned. It could have come from the baker's bread or the milk that is left on their doorstep at 4 a.m. Lizzie also tells Alice of concerns she has for their safety. She is afraid that someone her father has dealings with will burn the house down. She said angry words were spoken between her father and a man, and she saw a man lurking around their house at night. She also spoke of a time when the house was broken into during the day while she, her sister, and Bridget were home. This conversation may have been Lizzie genuinely scared and confiding in a friend, or it could be Lizzie planting doubt in Alice's mind while knowing that she was going to murder her father and stepmother the next day. Bridget also goes out that evening to see her friends on 3rd Street. She leaves the Borden house at about 7 p.m. as well. John Morse returns to the Borden house at about 8:30 p.m. He briefly chats with Abby and Andrew, then around 9 p.m, Lizzie arrives home but goes straight upstairs without speaking to her father or uncle. Abby goes to bed at this time. At 10 p.m, Andrew and John also go to bed, with Andrew staying in the guest room, which is the room where Abby is killed the next day. Bridget arrives home just after 10 p.m. and does not see any lights other than the lamp in the kitchen. She locks the door, gets herself a glass of milk and goes to bed. On the morning of Thursday, August the 4th, Bridget is first up at about 6:15 a.m. She goes to the cellar to get wood and coal for the fire and collects the milk from outside. Milk is left out each morning by the milkman. She continues with her morning duties, and the first person she sees that morning is Abby, coming down the stairs from her bedroom. Abby asks her to start breakfast. John Morse said he went downstairs at 6:20 a.m, but he does not see Bridget or anyone else. He goes to the sitting room and waits for Abby and Andrew. When Andrew goes downstairs, he goes outside to empty the slop pail and then goes into the barn where they had running water. He then collects pears from the tree and joins John and Abby shortly before 7 a.m. The three of them have breakfast together, while Lizzie is still upstairs. Breakfast was mutton soup, cakes, bread, fruit, and coffee. Abby would call Bridget with a bell when she needed something, and John testified that it is during breakfast when Abby requested that Bridget wash the windows inside and out. However, Bridget testified that it was not until after John had left the house that Abby asked her to wash the windows. This would be the last conversation she'd ever have with Abby Borden. About half an hour later, after breakfast, John and Andrew talked about cattle in the sitting room, while Abby did some dusting and other chores. Bridget was eating her breakfast in the dining room, and then she begins to clean up and wash the dishes. At about 8:45 a.m, John leaves to go to the post office and then to visit his niece and nephew at Daniel Emery's place at number 4 Weybosset Street. He hadn't planned to visit them, but Andrew had told John the night before that he had a niece and nephew there and he should go visit them. Andrew unlocked the side door and let John out. As he was leaving, he invited him back for lunch. This suggests that John did not have prior commitments that day. Had Andrew not suggested John go see his niece, would John have gone straight home that morning? At 8:50 a.m, Lizzie comes downstairs and goes to the kitchen where Bridget is still cleaning. But Bridget feels unwell and steps outside to vomit. Lizzie does not eat any breakfast, but can't remember if she ate one of the molasses cookies that they had. At 9 a.m, Andrew leaves the house to run errands. Lizzie claims that Abby said she had made up the guest room except for some pillowcases. She asks Lizzie what she wants for dinner, but Lizzie says she doesn't want anything. Abby then said she would go out and get dinner, and this was a common thing for Abby to do. Lizzie says she does not see Abby again after this conversation. Lizzie then gets an ironing board out and begins setting up to iron her handkerchiefs. She puts her irons on the stove to heat them. Lizzie would later say that Abby received a note that someone she knew was sick, so she was going to visit them and get dinner on the way home. But neither Lizzie nor anyone ever saw this note. Between 9 and 9:30 a.m, Bridget shuts the windows in the dining and sitting rooms. She gets a wooden pail from the cellar and fills it with water from the kitchen to wash the windows. She goes outside to the barn to get a brush. While outside, Lizzie appears at the side door, asking if she's going to do the windows. Bridget says yes and tells her she doesn't need to lock the door since she's coming back, but she can if she wants because she can get water from the barn. Interestingly, Lizzie does not hook the screen door, meaning she does not lock Bridget out. If Lizzie wanted to buy time to kill Abby, wouldn't she want to lock Bridget out? Crucially, if an intruder killed Abby and later Andrew, they could have entered the house at this time through the unlocked side door. Bridget said she had to go to the barn several times to get more water, so it's possible someone entered when she was in the barn. Between 9:30 and 10:20 a.m, Bridget washed the outside windows and briefly talked with a girl at the south side of the fence. The neighbour, Mrs. Churchill, sees her washing the windows. Meanwhile, according to Lizzie, she is in the dining room ironing handkerchiefs, but she is having trouble because her irons aren't hot enough. But Bridget does not see anyone in the sitting or dining rooms while she washes the windows. It could be that as Lizzie moved around the house, she simply missed her. But it is during this window, somewhere between 9 and 10 a.m, that Abby Borden is killed upstairs in the guest room. She is facing her attacker, and as she is hit on the right side of her face with a hatchet, she turns and falls face down on the floor. The attacker continues to hit the back of her head with the hatchet for a total of 19 blows. At 10:20 a.m, Bridget goes inside the house through the side door, hooks it behind her, and begins washing the inside windows in the sitting and dining rooms, but she does not see Lizzie. At about 10:40 a.m, Andrew Borden arrives home, but can't get in the front door. Bridget fumbles with the locks and lets him inside. The door had 3 locks and had been bolted. Bridget claims she hears Lizzie laugh from the top of the stairs, but does not see her. But according to Lizzie, when her father gets home, she is in the kitchen reading a magazine while waiting for her irons to get hot so that she could finish ironing. But she immediately changes her story to say she was upstairs repairing a garment when her father got home. She came down the stairs when Bridget let him in. When the district attorney, Mr. Knowlton, questions her on this disparity, Lizzie says she is confused from having answered so many questions. She then finally settles on being downstairs at the time her father came home. But according to Lizzie, she was ironing or waiting for her irons to get hot from just after 9 a.m. until 10:40 a.m. when her father got home. This is a very long time to be waiting around, so what was she doing in this time? She does say in the inquest that she went upstairs for 5 minutes to sew a piece of tape onto a garment, but according to her, she did not see or hear Abby at all. Lizzie is asked what Abby could have been doing up in the guest room for that hour and a half, if, as she claimed, had already made up the bed apart from 2 pillowcases. Lizzie does not know, but said Abby may have been using the sewing machine. She's asked if she heard the sewing machine, and she said no. Lizzie said Abby may have gone to her own bedroom during this time, but with the layout of the house, Abby would have had to have come down the front stairs and go through the kitchen to get to the back stairs, which led to her and Andrew's room. If she had done this, Lizzie would have seen her. Lizzie argues she could have come downstairs when she went upstairs for 5 minutes to sew the garment, but even so, since the guest room is right next to Lizzie's room, she surely would have heard Abby leave that room. When Andrew got home, he was still not feeling that well. He went to the dining room first, and Bridget says that this is when Lizzie must have come down the front stairs because she saw her come from the front hall into the sitting room, then into the dining room. Bridget overhears Lizzie ask her father if she has any mail. She then tells him that Abby had a note and had gone out. Andrew then went upstairs for 5 minutes and came back down to sit in the sitting room. Bridget takes her cleaning supplies to the dining room to start washing the windows in there. Lizzie said she helped her father take off his shoes and put on his slippers, take off his coat and put on his wool jacket. Lizzie says she asked him if he wanted to keep the windows as it was. In the photographs taken a few hours after the murders, we can see that Andrew is wearing shoes, even though Lizzie said he took them off. However, the shoes he is wearing in the photograph do not have laces. They are slip-on boots with elasticated sides, and this might be why Lizzie referred to them as slippers. She said she left her father lying down. Shortly after, just as Bridget is finishing the windows in the dining room, Lizzie asks her if she is going out, because Abby is out and she may go out too. She tells her about a cloth sale downtown, but Bridget says she's not feeling well. According to Bridget, this is when Lizzie gets an ironing board from the kitchen and places it in the dining room to commence ironing. At 10:55 a.m, Bridget goes upstairs to fix her room and lie down. Lizzie told the police officers during her inquest that she left her father in the sitting room and went to the kitchen, and from there to the pear tree where she picked up 3 pears and then went to the barn. She said she shut the screen door of the house, but when she came back from the barn approximately 20 to 30 minutes later, the door was open. While in the barn, she went upstairs to the loft part where she ate the pears and looked for lead sinkers for her upcoming fishing trip. This is in contradiction to what she told her friend Alice Russell on the day of the murders. She told Alice that the reason she was in the barn was to get iron to fix a window and screen. She told the neighbour, Mrs. Churchill, that she was in the barn looking for a piece of iron, but did not say what it was for. The first time we officially hear of the fishing sinker story is during the inquest, which occurred between August 9th and 11th, but it does appear a few days earlier in a newspaper article dated August 6th in the Fall River Daily Herald. The article publishes an interview with a reporter and Hiram Harrington, who is Andrew's brother-in-law. He is married to Andrew's sister, and it is said that he and Andrew did not get along. According to Hiram, he saw Lizzie the night of the murders. According to him, she would not see anyone else. In his interview with the reporter, Hiram said, "She informed me that it was her intention to go to Marion on vacation and she wanted the lead in the barn loft to make some sinkers. She was a very enthusiastic angler. I went over the ground several times and she repeated the same story. She told me it was hard to place the exact time she was in the barn as she was cutting the lead into sizable sinkers, but thought she was absent some 20 minutes. Then she thought again and said it might have been 30 minutes. Regardless of the reason, we know that there was a box of lead as described by Lizzie because William Medley found it when he searched the barn on August 10th. He said, "Found a box of leaf lead, weighing perhaps 15 pounds, at a distance of about 3 feet 2 inches from the door on the ground floor of the barn." Perhaps Lizzie was looking for lead or iron, but changed her story to looking for sinkers because it sounded like a more solid alibi than fixing a window. Or perhaps she simply knew the box existed and made the whole story up. Nevertheless, police did not find any footprints in the dust in the loft of the barn other than their own. Bridget said she was up in her room for 10 to 15 minutes when Lizzie called to her that her father was dead. Lizzie shouted, "Come down quick, father's dead, someone came in and killed him." Bridget came down and immediately Lizzie asked her to go fetch Dr. Bowen. So Bridget ran out of the house, only to find that Dr. Bowen was not home. Lizzie said to Bridget that she was out in the backyard when she heard a groan. She came in and the screen door was wide open. Lizzie then asks her to bring Alice Russell because she can't be alone in the house. But when Bridget leaves again, Lizzie is in fact alone in the house. Bridget grabs her hat and shawl and rushes to go get Alice. The neighbour, Mrs. Churchill, sees Lizzie looking distressed by the screen door and calls out to her. Lizzie tells her her father is dead, so Mrs. Churchill goes to look for a doctor. A man walking by, John Cunningham, sees Mrs. Churchill talking to others and uses a phone in a paint shop to call the police. Bridget finds Alice Russell at home and tells her that Andrew is dead. Alice thinks it must be poison, since that is what Lizzie was talking to her about the night before. Bridget goes back to the house while Alice quickly changes her dress and then makes her way to the Bordens. At 11:15 a.m, Officer Allen is ordered to go to the Bordens, and he takes a Mr. Sawyer with him. When he arrives, he tells Sawyer to guard the side door. Officer Doherty also heads to the Borden house. Dr. Bowen arrives home and is greeted by his wife. She tells him to go to the Bordens immediately. When he arrives at about 11:20 a.m, he asks Lizzie what's the matter. She replied that she was afraid that her father had been stabbed. Dr. Bowen checks on Andrew and sees that his face was all cut up with one of his eyeballs cut in half. He did not recognize him. He checks his pulse and concludes he is dead. Alice Russell and Mrs. Churchill arrive at the house. Alice sits Lizzie down in the kitchen. Dr. Bowen requests a sheet to cover Andrew's body, but Bridget does not want to go upstairs by herself, so Mrs. Churchill goes with her to get sheets from upstairs. After covering Andrew's body with a sheet, Dr. Bowen goes home to check the rail timetable and then leaves to telegram Emma to get her to come home. He stops at the baker's drugstore and tells Mr. Flint that Andrew is dead. Meanwhile, Alice asks Lizzie where she was when her father was killed, and Lizzie tells her she was in the barn looking for iron to fix the window. Lizzie says that someone needs to find Mrs. Borden, so Mrs. Churchill and Bridget go up the front stairs, and they see Abby's body lying on the floor next to the bed in the guest room. When Dr. Bowen arrives back at the Borden house shortly after 11:30 a.m, there is no commotion and the police have still not arrived. Mrs. Churchill tells him that they found Mrs. Borden upstairs and urge him to look. He rushes upstairs to the guest room and sees her lying face down on the floor next to the bed. According to Dr. Bowen, when he came downstairs from seeing Mrs. Borden, he found Lizzie lying in the dining room with wet towels on her forehead and Alice fanning her. The police eventually arrive and Dr. Bowen shows Officer Allen Andrew's body, and he suggests that Allen tell the marshal about it. Allen runs to the police station and tells the marshal that Andrew had been cut with something sharp like a razor. Officer Allen then takes Officer Mullally in the Borden house with him. Dr. Bowen shows them Abby's body, and it is only when the officers turn over Abby that they see she was also murdered. Officer Doherty in his witness statement said that Dr. Bowen told him she must have run upstairs after seeing the killing of her husband and died with fright. After visiting the post office that morning, John Morse heads over to see his relatives. The nephew was out, so he only saw his niece. He arrived at about 9:40 a.m, and he stayed there until about 11:20 a.m, which was confirmed by Mrs. Emery. They invited him to stay for lunch, but he said he had a prior engagement. He catches a streetcar and arrives back at the Borden's house at about 11:40 a.m. He doesn't see a crowd outside the house when he arrives. Instead of going straight into the house, he goes to the backyard where the pear tree is and picks a couple of pears. With a mouthful of pear, he enters the house through the back door that Mr. Sawyer was guarding. Bridget is inside, sitting on the steps. She tells him that Mr. and Mrs. Borden are dead. John finds several policemen inside the house and estimates about 7 or 8 people in total. He sees Lizzie in the dining room. According to Alice, it is only then, when John Morse comes in, that she realises the Bordens had been murdered. Alice said she thought they had been poisoned, since that was what Lizzie had been concerned about the night before. Only when John Morse speaks to Lizzie in the dining room does she realise they were killed with a hatchet. Dr. Bowen suggested to Lizzie that she go up to her room to lie down, so she and Alice go upstairs. Lizzie then changes her dress and puts on a loose wrapper and stays with Alice in her room. Sometime after 12 p.m, Officers Harrington and Doherty have a brief talk with Lizzie in her bedroom. She mentions that a few weeks ago she overheard her father having angry words with someone. According to Lizzie, the same man called again at the house, and again he and her father exchanged angry words. She did not see the man, but heard her father say, "I will not let my store for any such business." The officers go back downstairs, and Doherty finds Dr. Bowen in the kitchen with scraps of paper in his hand. He asks the doctor about them, but Dr. Bowen tells him they're nothing, and to do with his daughter. But the officer thought he saw whatever it was addressed to Emma. Then Dr. Bowen lifts the lid of a pot on the stove and puts the paper in there to burn them. The officer sees ash in the pot and thinks more paper may have been burned. According to Officer Hyde, he saw Lizzie and Alice go into the cellar that night. Lizzie carried a pail while Alice carried a lamp. She emptied it in the sink and then they went back upstairs. However, Lizzie went into the cellar alone about 15 minutes later, carrying the lamp. She went to the sink and stopped, but he could not tell what she did there. On August 8th, Officer Hyde spoke to Alice about what he saw, but she did not know that Lizzie went back into the cellar after her. She said it must have been while she was taking her bath. Alice then asks Hyde to come with her to one of the bedrooms in the Borden house. They go together and she points to something under the head of the bed. He picks it up. It was a club, about 20 inches long. Alice said she slept there last night and did not notice it then. While Alice seemed excited about this discovery, the club probably belonged to one of the police officers. If Lizzie did commit the murders, she certainly hid the evidence well, because no blood was found on her. This is one of the most perplexing aspects of the case. There is evidence of blood in several places of the house, as noted in the witness statements of people there that day, so we do know that blood did get spattered around. Maurice Daly, a carpenter, went to the Borden house with police. They took a marble slat from the west end of the dressing case, a piece of moulding that capped the mopboard, and a piece of plaster to which was adhered the wallpaper. Each of these articles had spots of blood on them. Mrs. C.J. Holmes then asked, "Do you want the bedspread and pillow shams?" The marshal replied, "If you please." These articles were taken from the northwest room on the second floor, where Mrs. Borden was found. A piece of wood was taken from the west casing of the door, which leads from the dining room to the sitting room where Mr. Borden was murdered. This piece of wood had a spatter of blood on it. Officer John Riley arrived at the Borden house about 12:35 on August 4th. He saw Mr. Borden on the sofa and saw blood spots on the door leading to the parlour. George Petty of 98 2nd Street said he went into the house with Dr. Bowen on his second visit. Mr. Borden had the appearance of having been killed but a short while, for the blood was fresh and flowing. I went upstairs, got down on my knees to examine Mrs. Borden's head. At once I saw she had been dead some time, and told the doctor she must have been dead an hour. I further said, "This is where the trouble began. This is the starting point." The blood had ceased to flow. It was dark and covered with a kind of skin. The fact that there was evidence of blood spatter indicates that there must have been blood flying around the room when the murders took place, meaning the killer likely got some on themselves. Lizzie did not have blood on her except for a small dot of blood on her petticoat, which was underneath her dress. She said it was from a flea bite. Andrew was lying on the sofa with his coat under his head. It was his prized Prince Albert coat, and he hung it up whenever he came home. If he hung it up, how did it get beneath his head? He didn't need it as a pillow, as there was already a pillow on the sofa. A letter to a local newspaper dated June 16, 1893, signed Concord NH for Justice, suggests that the coat was used as an apron. If the murderer put the coat on backwards to cover their front, it would have given ample protection, except for their head and hands. However, we do not know if Andrew Borden was wearing this coat that day. It's likely that he was, despite it being a warm day, since he usually wore it, and men of that time would not be seen outside without a jacket and tie. If that's the case, then the murderer would have got blood on them when they killed Abby, since the coat was not there until Andrew came home. The coat was never entered into evidence, and no one knows of its whereabouts. To murder two people with a hatchet to the head and not be covered in blood seems impossible. But maybe Lizzie had time to clean up, or maybe someone helped her clean up. F.L. Edson said, "I went down cellar from the entry, went to the washroom in the southmost corner of the cellar. On a bench or table were a number of wet towels. There was blood on the towels." Officer Medley said he found blood-covered towels in a pail of water. He said, "I inquired about some cloths which looked to me like small towels. They were covered with blood and in a pail half filled with water, and in the wash cellar." She said that was all right. She had told the doctor all about that. I then asked her how long the pail and its contents had been there, and she said 3 or 4 days. I asked the doctor about it, and he said it had been explained to him and was all right. However, Bridget told the same officer that she had not noticed the pail until that day, and it couldn't have been there previously because she would have noticed and washed them along with other washing she had to do. Lizzie had told the doctor that these cloths were from her menstrual cycle. Lizzie's story could be true since women at that time commonly used cloths for this purpose, but it is interesting that Bridget never noticed them before that day, and she would have, since she would have put them in the wash with other garments. Police found 2 axes and 2 hatchets in the cellar of the Borden house. One of the hatchets, and the two axes, had obviously been used and the blades were rough. But one of the hatchets was in good condition and quite sharp. It had some spots on the handle which police thought could have been dirt or blood, and the blade appeared to have been in water as if it had been cleaned. After testing, it turned out that the staining was not blood. None of the hatchets or axes found tested positive for blood. Another hatchet found had a missing handle. Officer Fleet discovered it in a box of tools in the cellar near the chimney. The handle had been broken off because the edges were ragged, and it was determined that it was a fresh break. Someone had broken off the handle within the last month. The hatchet was coated in ash, as if it had been in a fire or had fallen into the ash pile, and Mr. Fleet noted that the other tools in the box were dusty, but were not coated in the same ash as this hatchet. The blade was rusty on all sides, and it was determined that this uniform pattern of rust may have come from the hatchet being left outside all night, or being submerged in water, perhaps to clean it. The ashes could have been used to make the blade seem old. But the reason the police thought this hatchet could have been the one used on Abby and Andrew is because the blade was 3.5 inches long. The wounds were between 2 inches and 4.5 inches, and according to Dr. Dolan, the medical examiner, the hatchet could have caused these wounds. If this was the hatchet used, it might have been stained with blood during the attacks, and that's why the handle was broken off. Wood absorbs, and water would not have removed the stains. But police testimonies contradict each other. The handle may not have been missing at all. During the trial, Officer Mullally testified that he saw a piece of the handle in the same toolbox. Do you know anything of what became of the box? No, sir. Nothing else was taken out of it while you were there? Nothing but the hatchet and parts of the handle? Well, parts. That piece? That piece, yes. Well, that was in the eye, wasn't it? Yes, then there was another piece. Another piece of what? Handle. Where is it? I don't know. Don't you know where it is? No, sir. Was it a piece of that same handle? It was a piece that corresponded with that. The rest of the handle. It was a piece with a fresh break in it. The other piece? Yes, sir. Well, where is it? I don't know. Did you see it after that? I did not. Was it a handle to a hatchet? It was what I call a hatchet handle. I want to know about how long it was. Well, I couldn't tell you how long it was. I didn't measure it. No, I understand, but I mean about, give your best judgment. I don't think it was as long as the handle in them hatchets there. Shorter than that? It was shorter than them, if I remember right. Well, did you take it out of the box? I did not. Did you see it taken out? I did. Who took it out? Mr. Fleet took it out. Mr. Fleet took it out. Yes, sir. You were there. I was there. Anybody else? Not as I know of. Did Mr. Fleet put that back too? He did. There is then some confusion amongst the lawyers. Mr. Robinson says to the opposing counsel, "Have you that handle here, gentlemen?" Mr. Knowlton, the DA, says, "No." Mr. Robinson says, "You haven't it in your possessions, may I ask?" Mr. Knowlton says he never had it. Mr. Robinson then says, "The government does not know where it is," and Mr. Knowlton says, "I don't know where it is. This is the first time I ever heard of it." Officer Fleet was brought back to the stand, and he said that he did not see the handle in the box. So either one of them is lying or has a terrible memory. But this hatchet may not have been the weapon anyway. It did not appear to be new, and upon inspection of Abby and Andrew's skulls, the impression was that the murder weapon was new due to evidence of a gilt coating found. Observations made by a Dr. Draper, who was assisted by Dr. Cheever, examined the skulls and wrote to Mr. Knowlton, the district attorney, on May 31st, 1893 about gilt. He said, "The shining deposit can be seen with the naked eye. It is plainly visible with the use of a lens, when once its situation is indicated." So perhaps the handleless hatchet was not the one used in the attacks after all. Maybe the murder weapon was hidden or taken. Alfred A. Smith, a boy of 16 years old, made a statement upon his arrest for larceny to Officer C. Hammond of Philadelphia in the presence of Deputy Superintendent Charles Hart. Smith said he passed the Borden house near the relative time and saw a pair of bloody gloves along with a hatchet outside the north side of the house near the fence, and he stole them. He washed the gloves and hatchet, hid them in his coat, then hid the hatchet in a barn. Later, he went back to Bowenville barn about 10:55 p.m. and retrieved the hatchet, taking it home and keeping it about 3 weeks. He said the edge of the hatchet was smooth, having no nicks on it, but in using it, I dulled it and nicked it very badly. I sold it to Thomas Connors, who keeps a little store near Fulton Street School. He gave me 10 cents worth of candy for it. He claims a woman from the house, with bangs on her forehead, saw him steal these items. If Smith is telling the truth, this could explain why the murder weapon wasn't found. Another reason could be because it was hiding in plain sight. About a year after the murders, a hatchet was found on the roof of the neighbour's barn, located to the rear of the Borden house. Lizzie could have simply climbed onto the pile of lumber that was there and thrown it on the roof. Curiously, upon inspection of the hatchet, it appeared to have gilt. Some of the particles of rust being removed, a slight colouring of gilt was disclosed, which would either indicate that the hatchet was at one time used as an ornament, or was quite new when lost or discarded. Perhaps the murder weapon wasn't a hatchet at all. All we really know is that it was a sharp, cutting object. It could have been a meat cleaver. Some even think it was a candlestick holder. On the day of the murders, Lizzie's demeanour and behaviour was noted by several witnesses who saw her. Did she behave like an innocent person whose father and stepmother were just murdered? Or did she behave like a guilty person? When Dr. Bowen was first called to the house that morning, he described Lizzie as excited and in a hurry for him to come, but she wasn't in tears. He said Bridget seemed calm but uneasy and excited in action. After Abby's body was found, Charles Sawyer said Lizzie went into a swoon or a hysterical fit, and she laid down with wet towels on her forehead. After this, Officer Harrington spoke with Lizzie upstairs. He said Lizzie stood by the foot of the bed and talked in the most calm and collected manner. Her whole bearing was most remarkable under the circumstances. There was not the least indication of agitation, no sign of sorrow or grief, no lamentation of the heart, no comment on the horror of the crime, and no expression of a wish that the criminal be caught. All this, and something that, to me, is indescribable, gave birth to a thought that was most revolting. I thought, at least, she knew more than she wished to tell. Lizzie's friend Alice Russell described Lizzie that morning as dazed. Nobody described Lizzie as upset or crying, but that does not mean that Lizzie wasn't affected. She was probably in shock, which is a state the body goes into after trauma to prevent you from shutting down. Shock conserves blood flow to the vital organs and is a natural defense response. It's therefore completely normal that Lizzie would seem calm under the circumstances, and her demeanour in no way proves she had anything to do with the murders. Additionally, once Lizzie had gone upstairs to her room on that day, Dr. Bowen gave her some bromo-caffeine to calm her down. This would have contributed to her calm demeanour. The next day, Dr. Bowen gave Lizzie morphine, then doubled the dose the day after that, and continued to double dose her with morphine for the whole time she was jailed. This would have affected Lizzie's behaviour, mood, and memory, and contributed to some of her conflicting statements. Lizzie did, however, do something quite odd while she was on morphine. 3 days after the murders, Alice Russell went into the kitchen where Emma and Lizzie were. Lizzie was standing by the stove in the kitchen holding a light blue cotton dress. Emma asked Lizzie what she was going to do, and she replied that she was going to burn the dress because it was covered in paint. Alice left the room, and when she came back moments later, she saw Lizzie tearing up the dress. She said to Lizzie, "I would not do that where people can see you." Lizzie didn't respond, but the next day, when Alice spoke to her about it, Lizzie wondered why Alice had let her do it if it was such a bad thing to do. The police were confident that had the paint-covered dress existed in the house, they would have seen it, implying that the dress was actually covered in blood and had been hidden. If Lizzie did kill her father and stepmother, what could have been her motive? It was common knowledge around Fall River that Lizzie and Emma did not get along that well with their stepmother Abby. Accounts from witnesses on the day of the murders or just after confirm this. Mrs. Churchill, the neighbour, said, "The relations between Lizzie and the stepmother were not very friendly, but I have no personal knowledge of it. Yes, I have heard they do not at all times eat from the same table." Ellie M. Gifford of 38 Franklin Street said, "I know nothing personally of the domestic relations of the Borden family, but I have heard much rumour to the effect that they did not get along very pleasantly." Mrs. Perry Gifford said, "We do sewing for the Borden family. I have heard Lizzie say harsh things of her stepmother. She said she did not and would not dine at the same table. She also said she was a horrid old thing. She was very pronounced and outspoken when referring to Mrs. Borden." Miss Ida Gray of number 27 Whipple Street said last Friday evening on August 5th, while in the horse car, 2 ladies were talking to Lizzie Borden. One remarked that Lizzie said when referring to Mrs. Borden that she was one of the kind that never dies. Hiram Harrington, Andrew's brother-in-law, was not at all protective of Lizzie. When questioned, he said, "When the perpetrator of this foul deed is found, it will be one of the household. I had a long talk with Lizzie yesterday, Thursday, the day of the murder, and I am not at all satisfied with statement or demeanour. She was too solicitous about his comfort and showed a side of character I never knew or even suspected her to possess. She helped him off with one coat and on with another. This is something she could not do, even if she felt, and no one knows her, could be made to believe it." Augusta Tripp, who had not seen them for 5 years, said she didn't think Lizzie was fond of Mrs. Borden, but not unfriendly. Lizzie apparently talked more to her than Emma did. Mrs. Jane Grey, Abby's stepmother, said, "Things were not as pleasant at the Borden house as they might be. That is the reason I did not call on Mrs. Borden as often as I would have liked to. I told Mrs. Borden I would not change places with her for all her money." Mrs. Cyrus Tripp said, "Lizzie told me she thought her stepmother was deceitful, being one thing to her face and another to her back." Lizzie told Mrs. Tripp that her stepmother claimed not to have any influence with her father, but Lizzie thought this was not true, or he never would have given Abby's half-sister such a large sum of money. Lizzie then said to Mrs. Tripp, "I do not know that my sister or I would get anything in the event of my father's death." Dr. Bowen, on the other hand, described Lizzie and Abby's relationship as harmonious and perfect and natural. By all accounts, it appears that the relationship was not exactly the most friendly. Curiously, it seems that Lizzie spoke to Abby more than Emma did. Perhaps Emma disliked Abby more than Lizzie. About 5 years before the murders, there was an incident regarding money that caused Lizzie to stop referring to Abby as mother and instead address her as Mrs. Borden. This change signals some hostility and an effort by Lizzie to keep things cordial but nothing more. Tensions rose when Andrew bought Abby's half-sister and her family a house, putting it in Abby's name. He did this because Abby's stepmother decided to sell the house they were all living in after the death of her husband. Abby and her sister were close, so Abby asked her husband to buy the house so that her sister and her family could remain in the home. But Lizzie and Emma were not happy with this and told their father that if he's going to buy a house for Abby's sister, he should do the same for his daughters. They said, "What you've done for Abby's people, you should do for us." So Andrew, trying to keep the peace, gifted Lizzie and Emma the house on 12 Ferry Street that his father had left for him. Andrew suggested they rent it out, and they become landlords, which would then bring in their own income. They got 2 tenants, but the house was so old that there were so many repairs to be done. The cost of these, plus taxes, meant that they received little income from the property. So they asked their father to buy the house from them. He did, and he gave them $5,000 for it, which was generous since the house was only worth $3,000. Despite this generous gift, Lizzie and Emma would ignore Abby's family whenever they passed them in the street. It seems that they didn't like the perceived preferential treatment that Abby got from Andrew. As mentioned, Lizzie was an animal lover, and the Bordens kept pigeons in the barn. She made a roost for them and would feed them, but they were attracting young kids in the neighbourhood who would break into the barn and throw stones at them. So one day, Andrew killed the pigeons to stop the boys coming in. He removed their heads, either with his hands or with a hatchet, and brought them into the house for Bridget to pluck and cook. Lizzie asked, "Why are these heads off?" implying that this was the first time this had happened, so it wasn't something she was used to seeing. It's therefore likely that this event upset Lizzie and added to her resentment. But the biggest motive of all would have been inheritance. Andrew Borden was a wealthy man and had a fortune worth about $10 million in today's money. With her inheritance, Lizzie could live in the coveted Hill area with society's elite. She could live in a mansion and live a life she wanted, experiencing arts and culture and fine dining. She wouldn't have to be cooped up with her frugal father and evil Abby any longer. But there was a big problem. If her father died, Abby, not Lizzie and Emma, was going to inherit his wealth, and then the money would be passed on to her family, and the sisters would get nothing. In order for Lizzie to inherit her father's fortune, she would have to kill Abby first. Lizzie certainly had the means, the motive, and the opportunity to kill Abby and Andrew. But did she? Did she act alone? Or did she have an accomplice? Or was the murderer someone else entirely? Let's look at a plausible scenario. This is just a possibility of what could have happened, not fact. Andrew leaves the house at 9 a.m. Lizzie gets some coffee and a molasses cookie. Meanwhile, Bridget goes outside to vomit and then goes to the cellar to fetch her cleaning supplies. Abby asks Lizzie what she wants for dinner, but Lizzie says she doesn't want anything. She tells Lizzie that the guest room has been made up except for the pillowcases. She goes upstairs to finish. Bridget goes outside to start washing the windows and tells Lizzie that she does not need to lock the back door. Lizzie leaves the door unlocked and goes to the cellar to fetch the hatchet. She then goes up the front stairs to her bedroom where she changes into a light blue dress. Abby has just finished with the pillowcases. As she starts to walk out of the guest room, she sees Lizzie coming towards her. Lizzie hits her face with the hatchet. Abby turns and falls to the ground face first. Lizzie continues to hit the back of her head until she's satisfied that Abby is dead. Lizzie then goes to her bedroom once again and takes off the bloody dress. She hides it well and puts on the dress she was wearing before. She takes the hatchet downstairs to the cellar and washes it. She hides the hatchet somewhere. Lizzie gets some towels to wipe her face and skin clean, then takes them down to the cellar where she puts them in a pail of water. She goes back upstairs to her bedroom and waits for her father to come home. When Andrew arrives home, Lizzie comes out of her room and laughs when she sees Bridget struggle to open the door. Andrew comes in and goes to the dining room. Bridget washes the windows in the sitting room, and Lizzie comes downstairs, goes through the sitting room to the dining room, and asks her father if she has any mail. Andrew goes to the kitchen, up the back stairs, and to his bedroom for 5 minutes. During this time, Bridget washes the windows in the dining room, and Lizzie asks her if she's going out. Bridget says no. Andrew comes back downstairs and goes to the sitting room, and Bridget puts her cleaning supplies away. She then goes upstairs to lie down. Andrew had taken off his coat and hooked it in the dining room as he always did. Lizzie goes down to the cellar, retrieves the hatchet, and goes back to the dining room where she puts her father's coat on backwards to cover her front. She goes into the sitting room and stands over and behind him. She hits him repeatedly in the face with the hatchet. Once done, she takes off the coat and bundles it next to Andrew's head. She goes back to the cellar, washes the hatchet and her hands. She goes back upstairs and outside where she climbs on top of the lumber and throws the hatchet on the neighbour's roof. She goes back inside and calls out to Bridget that someone came in and killed her father. Another scenario could be that Lizzie and Bridget worked together. Perhaps Lizzie was always going to be the one to do the deed, but Bridget may have known what Lizzie was doing. Perhaps she didn't go upstairs to lie down while Lizzie killed her father. Maybe she was keeping guard to make sure nobody came to the house. Perhaps she was the one who disposed of the hatchet. Perhaps she made sure that Lizzie was clean from blood and put the cloths in the pail. It is possible that Bridget knew more than she let on. On her deathbed, she confessed to a friend that she helped Lizzie out at the trial, but there are no specific details as to what she meant. Quickly after the murders, Lizzie's lawyer paid for Bridget to go back to Ireland. At some point, Bridget received a large sum of $1,000, which is about $28,000 today. She claimed that her grandfather had died and left the money to her, but no such grandfather has ever been found. Some speculate that this money was a payoff from Lizzie to keep her mouth shut. Bridget would eventually move back to the US to Montana and marry a man named John Sullivan. Another scenario is Emma conspired to kill Abby and Andrew as well, but she didn't want to be the one to do it and didn't want to be around when it happened, so she stayed with friends in Fairhaven where she would have an alibi. But why would Emma, who promised their dying mother that she would always take care of Lizzie, let Lizzie be the one to do the killing? Well, it could simply be a matter of personality. Emma was quiet and sensitive, whereas Lizzie was far more outspoken, strong-willed, and probably had the confidence needed to carry out such murders. There is some speculation that Emma was in love with a man whose status was lower than hers, so Andrew would not let her marry him. The murders were a way for Emma to escape her father's home. However, so little is known about Emma compared to Lizzie. It's possible that Emma simply wanted her father's money as much as Lizzie did, and since she didn't like Abby either, she was happy to let Lizzie kill them. But there is no evidence that Emma was involved. But what about John Morse? Perhaps Emma, Lizzie, and John all conspired together. By all accounts, John was fond of his nieces and would correspond with Emma every few months. John just so happened to show up at the Borden house unexpectedly the night before the murders. But this was not unusual for John. He had turned up unannounced before. On the day of the murders, John said he left at 8:45 a.m. after last seeing Abby going into the front hall about 8:30. He says he went to the post office and sent a piece of mail, called a postal, then walked 1.25 miles to Weybosset Street, arriving at about 9:40 a.m. It's possible he returned to the house shortly after leaving and killed Abby. Perhaps Lizzie let him inside. It seems unlikely that John could have killed Andrew because he took a streetcar back to the Borden house after visiting the Emerys. John's lawyer said that John had remembered the car and conductor's numbers, which is a specific detail to remember. Perhaps John is innocent and was just an observant man and paid attention to details. Or perhaps he had conspired with Lizzie and knew he needed an airtight alibi, so he remembered the numbers on purpose. The Evening Standard on the 6th of August 1892 reported, returning, Morse took a streetcar on which 6 priests were passengers, 3 of whom sat on the seat with him. He left the car at the corner of Pleasant and 2nd Streets and walked direct to Mr. Borden's residence. The conductor of the car yesterday was a spare named Whitaker, and the news had been unable to find him today, as he would probably remember the circumstance of the 6 priests and Mr. Morse's riding with him. Mr. Morse's story has, however, been confirmed, so far as the priests being on the car is concerned, by conductor Kennedy of the car going east, who says he passed the car with the priests on the hill, about where Mr. Morse took the car, and that he took its time and it was just 22 minutes after 11 o'clock. It doesn't make much sense that John would kill Abby, then let Lizzie kill Andrew while he went to the Emerys. Why go to the Emerys at all if they weren't expecting him? It's possible he thought it would make a good alibi, and it's possible he convinced Mrs. Emery to lie for him and tell the police he was there from 9:40 a.m. Perhaps some hush money was involved. But there is still the question of the blood. What would John have used to cover himself? Or how did he avoid getting blood on his clothes? There was barely enough time for John to kill Abby, wait for Andrew to arrive, kill him, and make an appearance at the Emerys on Weybosset Street, only to arrive back at the Bordens just 40 minutes later. The Emerys' house was a 28-minute walk away. He would have arrived at about 11:30 a.m. and immediately turned back, taking the streetcar, which would have cut his journey time in half. It's an incredibly tight timeline, and to make it work, he would not have had time to clean himself up. Perhaps he put on Andrew's coat to cover his suit, but it seems unlikely that not a single drop of blood would appear on him. He did not have any spare clothes with him. So perhaps John did not commit the murders himself, but helped Lizzie and Emma plan them. Maybe he brought a new hatchet with him. Maybe he took it away with him afterwards. But what would be John's motive? He did not benefit from Andrew's fortune, so money wasn't in it for him. If John knew the murders were going to happen, but wanted an alibi, it would have been much easier to just stay put at home. Why place yourself at the crime scene? Nevertheless, many people are suspicious of John Morse. It does seem odd that he would arrive at the house the night before the murders, but it could just be a coincidence. Another character that is a little suspect is Dr. Bowen. He is the first person that Lizzie asks Bridget to fetch, but this could be because he lived close by and he was familiar with the Bordens. When Dr. Bowen arrived, he first saw Andrew and took his pulse. He knew he was dead. However, when Abby is found, Dr. Bowen's first thought is that she died by fright after seeing her husband. Yet Abby's blood was pooling around her head, so why did he think she had simply fainted? At the inquest, Dr. Bowen said that he first thought she had died by fright, but then he soon realised she too was murdered after seeing the blood. But that's not what happened according to the police. In the initial witness statements from the day of the murders, at 11:35 a.m, Officer Doherty arrived and Dr. Bowen told him that Andrew was dead. According to Officer Doherty, this is what happened. Dr. Bowen said, "Mr. Borden is dead. I went into the next room and there found the remains on a sofa covered with a sheet. In low tones, the doctor told me he was satisfied there was something wrong, for they were all sick the day before. He followed this by saying, to make matters worse, Mrs. Borden is lying dead upstairs. I suppose she saw the killing of her husband and ran upstairs and died with fright. I requested to see her, and on going upstairs found her lying on the floor face downward between the bed and dressing case. Several spots of blood was on the bed and also a large tuft of hair. On examining the body, I found she was lying in a pool of blood. I informed the doctor of the fact, and he expressed much surprise." According to the officer, Dr. Bowen didn't know Abby was murdered. Was he feigning ignorance because he had something to do with it? If the officer's account is true, it means that Dr. Bowen changed his story to say that he realised Abby had been murdered as soon as he saw her. Officer Doherty also observed Dr. Bowen acting strange in the kitchen. The officer said, "I went down in the kitchen, where Dr. Bowen, Assistant Fleet, Dr. Dolan, Bridget and several others were. Dr. Bowen had scraps of paper in his hand, on which there was some writing. He and I spoke about them, and he tried to put some of them together. He said, 'It is nothing. It is something about, I think, my daughter going through somewhere.' If I recollect correctly, it was addressed to Emma, but about that I am not sure." The doctor then said, "It does not amount to anything," and taking the lid off the kitchen stove, he dropped the pieces in. There was very little fire in the stove, and the ashes which were on top looked as though paper had been burned there. According to one anonymous witness, they saw Dr. Bowen on the day of the murders riding his horse and cart so fast that I thought at the time someone was dying. I am well acquainted with him, but I never saw him look so wild. It was about 15 minutes to 11. The doctor had hold of the reins with both hands, driving for dear life. Has Dr. Bowen ever been questioned where he was on the morning of the murder? This is the truth and nothing but the truth. Jane Grey, Abby's stepmother, said that prior to the murders, when the rest of the family were away vacationing, Dr. Bowen accompanied Lizzie to her church and sat together in the Borden seats. Dr. Bowen belonged to a different church, and he was married, so why would he go to this particular church with a single woman? This sort of act was considered scandalous at the time, but Jane Grey and Lizzie were not exactly fond of each other, and this story could just be embellished gossip. On the other hand, perhaps Dr. Bowen and Lizzie had an affair. Richard Powers, a retired state prison guard and Maryland historian, posed the theory that Dr. Bowen, who lived across the street, killed Andrew and Abby Borden and removed the murder weapon in his doctor's bag. Powers suggested that there were ill feelings between the doctor and the Bordens. But there is no real evidence that Dr. Bowen was involved either with Lizzie or the murders. He did not benefit financially from the murders, and after they happened, he dropped off the face of the earth. We don't know what happened to him or where he went. It's possible that someone not in the family killed the Bordens. They may have slipped in the unlocked side door when Bridget went to the barn to get water and when Lizzie was in the dining room ironing. They went up the front stairs to the guest room and killed Abby. They hid until Andrew arrived home, then slipped into the sitting room while Bridget was washing the windows in the dining room and Lizzie was out in the barn. But this seems unlikely because Bridget surely would have heard something going on in the next room. But say it did happen, who could it have been? There are many potential suspects because Andrew was not exactly a well-liked man around town. But if he was the target, why kill Abby? Maybe she saw the attacker, and in surprise at being seen, they killed her too. But it was a big risk to carry out these murders when both Bridget and Lizzie were home. But perhaps they did this on purpose, because they knew that the people in the house would likely be blamed. So if not Lizzie, Bridget, or John Morse, who could it have been? Hiram Harrington was married to Andrew's sister, making him Andrew's brother-in-law. Hiram was the only person Lizzie ever publicly mentioned had beef with her father, but there is no evidence he was involved. But he does heavily imply that the person responsible lived in the Borden house. In the August 6th edition of the Fall River Daily Herald, Hiram tells the reporter, "When the perpetrator of this foul deed is found, it will be one of the household. I had a long talk with Lizzie yesterday, Thursday, the day of the murder, and I am not at all satisfied with statement or demeanour. She was too solicitous about his comfort and showed a side of character I never knew or even suspected her to possess." When asked what the motive could have been, Hiram replied, "Money, unquestionably money." Regarding Hiram and Andrew's relationship, Hiram's inquest testimony went like this: "You and he did not speak. You and he were unfriendly. You and he were not on good terms. We never had no words or anything of that kind. Some years ago I thought he was hard, and I cut his acquaintance. That is, he came to my house, and I would leave the room, and he very soon saw I cut his acquaintance, and he did mine." There is not enough evidence or information to suggest that Hiram wanted Andrew dead. While some may argue that Hiram would have wanted some of Andrew's wealth to transfer to his sister, Hiram's wife, it must have been known to Hiram that Andrew's wealth would pass to his children, Lizzie and Emma, if him and Abby died. Unless, of course, he was misguided and believed his wife would inherit something. Joe Carpenter initially emerged as a prime suspect in the murder case of Andrew and Abby Borden. However, his alibi proved to check out and he was no longer a suspect. Formerly employed as a bookkeeper for Borden and Olney, Carpenter faced accusations of embezzling a substantial sum of over $6,000 over several years, a considerable amount during the late 1800s. Although he was arrested, the charges were quietly dismissed. Carpenter paid Andrew back some of the stolen money, but much of it was paid back in mill stock, which eventually became worthless. At this point, it's speculated that Andrew wanted Carpenter arrested, but Carpenter threatened to expose Andrew's dishonest business practices. As such, Carpenter moved out to Fall River without paying back Borden the full amount he owed. After the murders, witnesses came forward suggesting that Carpenter was in Fall River at the time of the murders. Peter Driscoll, a local barber, said that he had shaved Carpenter on August the 1st, and a schoolteacher named Dean said that Carpenter was in Fall River on August the 4th and left the next day with his wife for Albany. A letter surfaced, which was mailed to Carpenter from Fall River on June 22, 1893, from his wife. The letter read, "My dear husband, Lizzie has been acquitted, and I don't think they can do anything with you now. I want you to come home to spend the 4th. The papers give a description of the man seen over the fence on the morning of the murder. Can you prove where you were on the morning of the murder? Annie." While Carpenter appears to have had a grudge against Andrew Borden, and the letter from his wife is odd, Mrs. Victoria Foreman, Carpenter's landlady, said to the best of her knowledge, Carpenter stayed in her rooming house every night between July 18th and August 13th. Once police spoke to the landlady, they dropped Carpenter as a suspect. There are other suspects as well, such as the odd men lurking around the house that Lizzie said she saw. Lizzie also thought that the murders could have been related to the break-in at the Bordens the previous year. They were robbed of $100 in cash and several horse car tickets which belonged to Andrew, and several pieces of jewellery including a watch that belonged to Abby. Andrew's desk was also rummaged through. It is often believed that the thief was Lizzie. Andrew called off the investigation, possibly hinting that he too believed the culprit was his own daughter. Later, police would question people in Fall River giving out horse cart tickets which didn't belong to them. When asked how they got the tickets, they said Lizzie Borden gave them to them. There are also rumours that Lizzie was a shoplifter, and if she was caught, the items stolen would be billed to her father, who would pay up. But there is no real proof that Lizzie was a thief. It's possible that Lizzie wasn't responsible for either, but really did think the robbery and murders could be related. It's also possible that she was responsible for both, or one or the other. Another potential suspect is the strange man that Dr. Handy had seen. Dr. Handy and his wife were close with the Bordens. Lizzie would vacation in Marion at Dr. Handy's house to spend time with his daughter and other friends. She was to stay there with around 12 other women and girls during her upcoming fishing trip on the 8th of August. Dr. Handy's wife Susan was also fond of Lizzie. She is quoted in the Fall River Evening News as saying, "I have been a frequent visitor at the Borden home during the last 15 years, and I never saw anybody more kind both to Mr. and Mrs. Borden than Lizzie and Emma." At the trial, Dr. Handy said, "I went by the Borden house on the morning of the murders at 9 o'clock, and again a little after 10:30. Saw a medium-sized young man of very pale complexion, with his eyes fixed on the sidewalk. He was passing slowly towards the south. He was paler than common and acting strangely. He was walking very slowly, scarcely moving. He was agitated or weak, staggering or confused, or something of the kind. Did not appear intoxicated, seemed mentally agitated, showed this by intense expression of his face. I think I had seen him on some previous day. He did not stagger." Dr. Handy was not the only person to see a strange man that morning. Police Officer Hyde also saw a strange man in the vicinity of 2nd Street on the morning of the murders. Unfortunately, the man was never found and questioned. Who do you think was responsible for the murders of Andrew and Abby Borden? Leave a comment below. Lizzie was arrested and charged with the murders. After almost a year in jail, her trial commenced in the summer of 1893. She was still taking morphine at the time, which may have affected her. The real skulls of Andrew and Abby were presented in court, which caused Lizzie to faint. But her defence successfully fought the prosecution's case, noting the lack of physical evidence linking Lizzie to the murders. They also played the gender card and argued that a woman could not have committed such a heinous and brutal act. It seemed the all-male jury agreed with this sentiment, and after a very short deliberation, they came back with a not guilty verdict. Lizzie was free to go and received half of her father's estate. Once free, Lizzie was shunned by the locals, but she decided to stay in Fall River anyway. She and Emma bought a mansion called Maplecroft on the hill, just as Lizzie always wanted. She and Emma lived together there for many years, enjoying the high life with servants and all modern conveniences. They also built a monument upon Andrew and Abby's graves. But one day, Emma left and the sisters stopped talking. Nobody knows what happened and what caused Emma to stop speaking to Lizzie. Whatever happened, it must have been big because Emma and Lizzie had always been close. Some people speculate that it could have been Lizzie's lifestyle that turned Emma off. Engaging in frequent travels to New York, Boston, DC, and various other destinations, Lizzie indulged in shopping and attended shows. Additionally, she hosted extravagant parties at Maplecroft for her newfound friends. One notable acquaintance was Nance O'Neill, an actress. Lizzie met Nance in Boston around 1904, and their bond quickly deepened. Lizzie showered her with attention, giving rise to rumours about a possible romantic involvement, though neither woman addressed the speculations. Some accused Nance of leveraging Lizzie's generosity and financial support. Emma supposedly grew frustrated and moved out of Maplecroft in 1905. Later, she told a Boston newspaper, "The happenings at the French Street house that caused me to leave, I must refuse to talk about. I did not go until conditions became absolutely unbearable." Despite Nance's friendship with Lizzie lasting only a few years, the estrangement between Lizzie and her sister endured for the rest of their lives. Lizzie changed her name to Lizbeth and lived in solitude with her dogs in her mansion until her death. She never married, never had any children, but local children would throw objects at her house. They regularly pranked her, and her church-going friends had long abandoned her. In 1897, Lizzie would make headlines once again when she was accused of shoplifting in Rhode Island, but she was not charged. Lizzie passed away in June 1927 at the age of 66, and Emma died just 9 days later. Today, the Borden family home on 2nd Street has been transformed into a popular bed and breakfast. Many ghost hunters spend the night there, trying to communicate with Abby and Andrew Borden, hoping they will reveal who killed them.